sessions with Bengt, but maybe you will talk more about that. So welcome, Bengt.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be here. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Bengt Södeström. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Stockholm. My background is I've been working with sexually abused children and their families for many years as a psychologist and manager of a special clinic. And the last 4 or 5 years, I've been recruited here to the Children's Welfare Foundation in Sweden as an expert on violence and sexual abuse. And my role here is that I also am manager for the CPC-CBT training and in this project too. So it's great to be here, and since so many are unfortunately have to wait for the actual training because we do it in internship training on a facility here in Sweden, so we have to wait for the shot to everyone being able to meet. We thought that it would be nice to have these 3 pre-lectures, and the subjects are the ones that were requested from the national coordinators when we had a pre-meeting discussing this. So the first subject today is on research on child physical abuse, since that is the target group for CPC-CBT. And also research on the results of CPC-CBT as they have been researched here in Sweden. So that's that. And we have 2 hours, and I plan to use the first hour on the research on child physical abuse. I talk for 35-40 minutes something, with a interval in the middle of, with a movie to show you also, and then at the end of the first hour, I will open the floor for discussions. And please write in the chat if you have questions during the lecture, and we can discuss those at the end of the first hour. And then we have a break for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we have the second hour together on the research on CPC-CBT with the same structure. So please write questions in the chat. Maybe you, Linda, can keep an eye on the questions and summarize them at the end of the hour.
Absolutely.
Good. So I will use PowerPoint slides, and you will have them as PDFs sent to you afterwards by Linda. They're having all the links to the movies and stuff, so you will be able to access them afterwards. There you go. So this is the structure of today. Swedish research on physical child abuse, the first hour, and Swedish research on CPC-CBT, the second hour. Yes, there have been national surveys of child abuse conducted in Sweden for a couple of decades. And we have been funding them and coordinating them together with researchers since the year 2000. The last one was conducted in 2016, and the next one will be conducted, we hope, at 2022, if we are allowed back in the classrooms, because the respondents are pupils and their parents have been in all these surveys. And all the surveys have been addressing physical child abuse or corporal punishment in some way. And since the years have gone by, we have also added a lot of questions on all the kinds of child abuse within families and outside families. And here are some of the Swedish publications. But today I'm going to talk from these 2 publications Violence Against Children in Sweden is the main publication with the bulk part of the results, and Violence is No Solution is more popularized version, more easy to access if you are not a researcher yourself. And they are downloadable for free on these links that you see here. And the researchers have been Carolina Järnbro and Staffan Jansson from Karlstad University. And they have been writing the popular version together with Åsa Landberg from us here at the Children's Welfare Foundation. So what do we know? Well, the actual prevalence of child abuse of all kinds is unknown to us, even if we have done this big population study. The thing we know is the second circle, the prevalence according to anonymous service. The last one in 2016 was done with around 4,700 pupils. Some of them were in the 9th grade of primary school. They were in the age of 14 to 15, and the rest of them were at the 2nd grade and high school, around 16 or 17 years old. And they done this huge survey in the classroom under supervision and answered anonymously. And of course, they don't cover all the prevalence. They reported all kinds of child abuse they have had experienced during their upbringing. And of course, they perhaps didn't remember everything. And even though they were a representative cohort of Swedish pupils, people who couldn't attend could perhaps be some categories we missed. And mentally disabled children couldn't attend because this was a pen and paper survey and so on. So the actual prevalence is, of course, larger than the one we can present. But there are also other statistics that you might find on Swedish prevalence. There are statistics on reported prevalence, and from this survey we can say that those cover around 10% or so from our sample, because only around 10% on average say that they have reported to social services or to the police. And you can also find statistics from Sweden on convictions or reported crime, and this is even a very small portion of the actual prevalence, of course. So I thought I would show you this movie first. This is a movie based on the popular version of the results, and it's a good starting point, I think, to see this.
Each and every child has the right to grow up without violence, and the goal is to completely end violence against children. There is still a long way to go, both here in Sweden and in the rest of the world. Researchers surveyed pupils in grade 9 and high school to find out just how common child abuse really is, meaning violence by an adult. Violence against children has decreased in Sweden. Nowadays, far fewer parents use violence as a method of raising their children, compared to 10 or even 20 years ago. But far too many children are still subjected to it. A total of 44% of the pupils had suffered some form of child abuse at some point in their life. This includes physical or mental violence, neglect, experiencing violence against a parent, or sexual abuse. Most of those who experienced child abuse had been subjected to less serious violence on a few occasions. The different forms of child abuse often overlap. The same child may experience many different forms of violence, sometimes from several different adults. Some of these children feel so bad that they don't want to live anymore. Of the children who were subjected to as much as 4 or 5 different forms of child abuse, almost half of them frequently thought about taking their own life, and 1 out of 5 had tried to take their own life on at least 5 occasions. It doesn't have to be this way, because child abuse can be prevented and good help is available. Most children who are being abused tell someone. Sometimes they tell someone in their own age. But it's not that common for a child or an adult to actually report the abuse once they found out about it. This means that far too many children do not get the protection and support they are entitled to. We can change this if we listen, give support, speak up, and report. Inform. Tell children that no one is allowed to hurt them, and that they have the right to get support and protection if someone does. Ask. Direct questions make it easier for a child to talk about what is happening to them. Take action. If you suspect that a child is being abused, contact social services. If you discover abuse or think that a child is in danger, call the emergency services. If you want to report a crime, call the police or go to your local police station. Read and download the report Violence is no solution at allmannabarnhuset.se.
Yes, there you go. Let's dive into these figures a bit more in detail and make some comments about them. First, this film talks about all the kinds of child abuse, abuse from parents, from adults, and by any adult, it was more than half of the pupils have never been subjected to any form of child abuse from any adult, 56%, which is a quite high figure compared to international studies. The Nordic countries are on this kind of level, I guess. And the exposed by any kind of child abuse from parents, any time of any kind, however mild or severe, almost 2/3 of the pupils have never experienced any kind of abuse from their parents, but 36% have experienced some kind. And physical child abuse is the topic of today's lecture, and these are the figures. By any adult, 24% have been hit or slapped or pushed or beaten up or hit by objects or all that kind of physical abuse. Answered yes to those questions, but 3/4 had never been that. And from parents, it was even more uncommon. 14% said that they have been subject to any kind of physical abuse from 1 or 2 of their parents. And as the movie said, it has been changing during in the course of time. Here are comparable figures from results from the answers of pupils in grade 9 in primary school, because they have been included in all these surveys, even before the year 2000 in surveys. And it's a third had experienced physical child abuse by a parent in 1995, and then it has decreased and continues to decrease, even though it's not as a steep curve downwards nowadays, but it's still decreasing. And it will be interesting to see in 2022 what kind of figures we end up with then. So here in the 9th graders, it's 11% who have experienced some kind of physical abuse by a parent. It's important to add that if we look at the severe kind of physical abuse, being severely damaged, damaged enough to go to hospital, or hit by instruments, or being hit many times repeatedly, or that kind of severe kind of child abuse, the level has been quite the same over all these years. It's a handful of percent of the children who experience that kind of severe punishment. So it's obvious that also when we look at the surveys with parents, we see that almost no parents in Sweden nowadays think that it's right to hit children. It's very few that answer that they think it's a good idea to hurt their children in any way. And almost all the children think that children should never be hit by adults. And those who get severely hit, it's probably that those parents are not uninformed. Almost all of them who severely hurt their children do so because they lack in their, they are insufficient in their life. Something happens, there are crises or stresses or drug abuse or life circumstances that make them fail as parents and step over the line and use excessive force and threats to their children. So has been a handful of percent over all these years. So we can say that the information campaigns and the public knowledge about the damage that physical child abuse, the harm that physical child abuse does to children, has succeeded. So this kind of mild corporal punishment, acceptance of violence has diminished, but the severe forms when parents don't want to hurt their children but fail as parents and do it anyway, that is persistent on a few percent level. And in 2016, if we include the second graders in high school, there's 14% who say that they have been hurt in any kind of way physically by a parent. 6% say that this happened in preschool years, in the preschool years. And 11% say that it happened in later year in primary school years. And 4% say that it happened both in primary school and preschool years. So we can make the conclusions that a majority of the children who were physically hurt in the preschool years continued to be physically hurt by their parents also in primary school years. So what about the impact on health? In the last couple of surveys in this series, there have been a lot of questions about perceived health issues and specific health issues, and I will highlight a few of those. This is the general health question. Do you feel well or don't you feel well? And this is the difference between those who have been abused in the yellow columns and those who have not been abused. And as you see, all kinds of reported abuse increase the number of answers, pupils answering that they don't feel well in a general way. And physical abuse is at the far left, as you see, and 30% of those who say that they have been physically abused report that they have generally poor health. And in response to more specific questions about psychosomatic disorders, we see the differences here. Being subjected to some form of child abuse increases the amount of pupils answering that they have psychosomatic disorders. And if you turn the figures around, you can say that if you find the pupils who have answered that they have 2 or 3 psychosomatic disorders, a majority of those have been victims of child abuse. So it's also a good clinical observation to make that if you meet a child who has more than a couple of psychosomatic disorders, it's a good reason to ask about abuse experiences. I want to go back to this illustration of the statistics. This is the statistics of reported child abuse from parents. And it's all kinds of child abuse, however mild or severe. And as you see, it's 24% who say that some kind of physical abuse from parents have happened to them. If we look at it overall figures and include other than parents, it's 40%, and it's predominantly girls. 40% more girls than boys are subject to all kinds of these abuses, except physical abuse from people outside the family than the boys are in majority. Otherwise, the girls are more subject to all these kinds. And as you see, sexual abuse within the family is 9%, but if you ask about it outside the family, it's much higher. I also want to stress this that was mentioned in the film about polyvictimization, or being subject to several kinds of abuse, and the impact that has. And this illustration is almost completely accurate about the overlaps that the statistic is showing. So from the 24% of pupils who say that they have been physically abused in the family, 32% of them say that they have been abused with at least 2 more kinds of abuse from the parents. And if we categorize them and look at them as polyvictimized, we can also see that that has a great impact on their health. So I think this is very useful illustration, and I use it a lot, just to remind us that we need to ask, if we meet children who are physically abused, we also need to ask about other kind of abuse and investigate those. And also to remind us that if we identify polyvictimization or several kinds of abuse, that has a great impact on the well-being of the child and on the prospect of future health. Perhaps even more so than the amount of or the severity of the individual kinds of abuse that the child has been subject to. And here is a graph illustration these health issues from 3 different groups. The blue group is the pupils who say that they have not been abused at all. And the yellow group is the one who has, those who have said that they have suffered 1 kind of abuse or 2. And the green ones are the ones who say that they have been subject to 3 or more types of abuse, the ones we call polyvictimized. And as you see, it's a huge difference. General well-being is much worse with the polyvictimized, and psychosomatic symptoms those who in these results are the ones who say that they have 3 or more psychosomatic symptoms. And self-harm, as was mentioned in the movie, is very high with the polyvictimized, and suicide attempts. Almost a third of the polyvictimized children say that they have tried to kill themselves. So this is a real issue, and I think I've been working in this field a long time, and this is a thing we didn't think about much. And it's also a risk when we specialize our way of working, and we specialize in one kind of victim group, with providing treatment and interventions for them. We mustn't forget this common occurrence of polyvictimization and trying to identify those kids and give them the proper interventions. And a few words about the vulnerable groups or the risk categories. On the left here, we see 5 categories of pupils who turn out as particularly vulnerable when it comes to being victimized by child abuse in general, and also in getting bad health results from that. And there are other groups, of course. Girls are, as I said, are more subject to child abuse in general, except for physical violence by someone outside the family, where boys are in majority. So being a girl is a risk group, or you're in a vulnerable group as being a girl. But these 5 are standing out very high. Pupils who say that they are placed in the foster home or out of home placement score high in being victimized on all kinds of abuse, and also in all health indicators. And that's not so surprising, perhaps. Most of them is probably due to that they have been victimized before the placement, and the placement is a result of them being victimized and the response to their victimization. So that's understandable. But we also know that some get abused in foster home or in out-of-home placement, and that needs to be addressed too, of course. Pupils with disabilities are overrepresented in all the kinds of abuse categories, and that's also understandable. I think the stressors that adults around them are subject to, or might push people around them to act badly against them, and also communication issues may play a part. One group that stands out in this research are the very small group, but very interesting group, who didn't want to identify themselves as male or female in the surveys, or they ticked the box that they didn't want to identify as either. And this is a very small group, but they score very high on all the abuse forms. They are at the down right chart in this picture. They are the blue columns, and you see they score very high on physical abuse. Over 40% of them say that they have been subject to physical abuse, and if we see any form, it's over 70% of them have been subject to some kind of child abuse. So they are a group to be concerned with, actually, because the incident risk is so high for them. And we also have pupils who say that their parents haven't reached an agreement on living arrangement or visitation after separation between parents. They also score high on all the columns, all the times of child abuse. And at last, we have the category that also score. They score the highest, actually. And this is the group. It's a bit bigger group than the ones who doesn't identify as male or female. This is the kind of pupils who say that they don't have control over their own lives. What we often call as honor-related oppression or violence in the home. And one question in particular strikes as a real determinator of this kind of vulnerability for being abused. And those are the question they had to answer the question: are you allowed to decide who you would marry or live with in the future? And those who say no, I am not allowed to decide who I would marry or live with in the future. Those are in the upper right chart here, diagram. As you see, almost 60% of them had been subject of physical abuse, and over 80, almost 90% of them had experienced some kind of abuse during their upbringing. So this is really a high risk group, and we need to address them very carefully, I think. Yeah, so that's the statistics. I think I'll stop to share this presentation now and stop for some comments and questions and discussion points. No questions in the chat, I see. So I open the floor. Please put on your cameras and your microphones, and let's discuss these figures. Do you recognize them? Do you have something similar to compare with, or is there something who has been as a surprise?
I could say from our studies is that we can recognize all the figures and all the results that you showed to us.
Yeah.
And I think the question about the child being placed in a foster care being a risk factor, I think it's very interesting because it is, I mean, as you said, I mean, probably most of them have been or have faced abuse before being placed in a foster care. But I think it's an interesting question whether it is a result or whether it is something that the child gets abused while being in a foster care or foster placement. So I think it's an interesting question and something that should be researched more.
We also know from sexual abuse that if you have been sexually abused, it's a risk factor of being abused again. It's also a matter of how you respond to challenges and upbringing measures and all kind of stresses in life, and that interaction with people who care for you or have responsibility for you. So that's you could imagine that some of the kids in placement are more challenging for parents, even though they have should know that and should act to counteract that. Yeah, it's an interesting question. It is. Yeah. Thank you. I know. Any other comments or thoughts about this?
I have a question, Bengt, related to the honor-related violence, because when I've tried to find similar studies, because of course I've read your report, but I find it hard to find similar studies around the to refer to, so you can compare it. Do you know anything about how this phenomena or type of violence is framed? Is it framed in another way in other countries, or like?
I can only talk about reports from people working with these children. It seemed to be like some of them describe that it's been exaggerated because the family has moved to Sweden, where it's not okay to hit your child, and it's not okay to limit the freedom of a girl, or to it's not okay to control the girl in the family's what do you call it, chastity, or so that they sometimes I hear that people helping these children, they report that the family has become worse in those respects since moving here, because they need to reaffirm their connection with the old country, and also report back to the family in the old country, and feel pressure to uphold their value system even harder here than they would, and also the kind of kind of not outspoken, but the kind of measures that everyone takes to go around a harsh system is harder to do when you're not in that system. It's perhaps harder to do when you're in a new environment.
How does that affect treatment? Like the setup of treatment, if this violence is in the whole structure, is that something that?
I haven't worked so much with honor-related children. I have had a few, and my experience is that many of the families, the core family that's with the child, the closest family, need support to handle all the relationship, or all the extended family, and the pressure from the extended family. And the extended family is often more a trouble than the closest parents. But they are, it's hard, and many of these children need to be out of the system totally. So and it's also important to say that it's not only immigrant families. It's of course more common from families from outside the Nordic countries, these kind of problems, but it's also it's not unheard of in criminal families and kind of families involved in crime, that they have this kind of repression against the children, and things they are not allowed to do, and they're not allowed to associate with some peers or choose partners and so on. But it would be interesting to do the same kind of surveys in countries where this is more of a common cultural phenomenon than it is here. Yes, any other questions or reflections? Maybe this was on a far too basic level. I don't know. Everyone knew this already. It would be interesting to hear if someone outside the Nordic countries have done any research, or have any research findings to compare this with.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Unfortunately, in Cyprus, I work in children's house, sexually abused children.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we don't have any research here, and it's a pity, because as practitioners, we actually see the correlation between other kinds of violence and how they affect the results. However, it's very difficult to have research and study all these effects because of how let's say it's a taboo subject in Cyprus to discuss. So I'm not sure how you do it in Sweden, how do you do the research? And
yeah, we can't. We wish we could ask questions to younger pupils. Some of the early studies use sixth graders, but in later years we only have got ethical permission to ask from 15 years up and up. So we also struggle with. We would like to ask also younger children about this. And I suppose that this attitude change in the Nordic countries about child abuse also makes it harder for parents to say no, and so on. And parents also answer a lot of the surveys quite freely and talk about their struggles and what do they do instead of using corporal punishment. How do they raise the child instead of that? So that's also interesting data that we have, but even so, you also need funding. This isn't a cheap kind of. You need someone to fund it, and you need someone to do it. So I understand that it's hard to make. I was also thinking about this. I'm sure you're all familiar with the ACE studies. Do you recognize this, Joanna? The ACE studies from the.
I'm not familiar with it.
No, it's been studies going on for decades in primarily in the United States, but it's been done all over the world. It's about following up 10 factors of childhood experiences, aversive childhood experiences. So they followed up physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse. If the mother has been abused, subject for violence, or if they have lived in a family with drug abuse or mental illness or separation between the parents, or if they have been growing up with one of the parents in prison, or if they have experienced emotional or physical neglect. So those 10 categories, and they have been asking a lot of adults or older teenagers about this and compared with their health. And this is I just read a study from 2017, a meta study of 250,000 participants all over the world, and they state that if you are polyvictimized, if you have 4 of these categories in your life, it 7 times increase the risk of you becoming violent yourself, abusing drugs in the future, and it's 2 to 3 times increases the risk of cancer and all kinds of, not just the behavioral problems, but also quite hardcore physical symptoms because of the theory is that if you are subject to so many different kinds of abuse and aversive childhood experiences, there is no time for recreation and no time to relaxation. So you're on constant stress level, and that also affects your immune system, and it also affects a lot of physical variants, and it apparently shortens lifetime expectancy and so on. And this fits well, I think, into these circles I show you about the overlapping and the risk of being polyvictimized.
That's very interesting. Thank you. I'm gonna
So this you don't have to know perhaps exactly how it is in Cyprus. People are the same all over the world, and it's a very bad thing to be stressed all the time when you are a child. So thank you. I think we'll give ourselves a 15 minutes break, and we'll meet again at 11 o'clock my time, and see you again in 15 minutes. Okay. Hello again, it's 11 o'clock. Welcome back. This second hour, I will be talking about the research on the therapy method CPC-CBT, combined parent-child cognitive behavioral therapy, and the research we've done here in Sweden on the results of that method. Just a few words first about the method itself and what it is. I suppose most of you know about it, but I'll summarize it very shortly. It's a treatment model specifically designed for children who have been suffered physical child abuse in the family, and where the investigation ends up in deciding that it's not so severe that you need to take the child out of the family and put it in placement somewhere, or that would be worse than having the child stay in the family, and the family is responsive to do a change. The parents doesn't have to say that, okay, we did this crime and prosecute us, and we admit to everything that the child says that we have done, but the parents need to say that, okay, we need to change somehow. We don't function as a family. We need to have some kind of help being a better family together. And the child has to have told about physical abuse. And it's also important that the prerequisites for treatment is there, that the parents can cooperate, that one parent isn't afraid of the other parent, and so on. And also that there has been a good foundation for the decision that this family can function together. So if there's been sexual abuse, for example, it's not suitable to have the child process the sexual abuse experience together with the perpetrator, because it's so complicated to make things safe and to break all the kind of intricate bonds and systemic interaction between the perpetrator and the victim. But if it's physical abuse, it's corporal punishment and that kind of violence against the child, and there is a good foundation to function together as a family and continue together as a family. This method is suited for that, and it was important to Sweden. Imported to Sweden because of there was a lack of help for these children. Most of these cases ended up with that the investigation, the social services investigation, protection investigation, ended up with the decision that it would be too harsh to take the child out of the family, so you can continue together. And how can we help you? And they tried to offer different kinds of things, and the families turned it down mostly, and they had no good methods. And there are some positive parenting kind of programs, the Incredible Years and all these kind of courses or programs for parents, how to raise your child in a non-violent way. Those were available, but they didn't provide any help for the child to process the traumatic experiences of being subject to physical violence. And also it didn't help the child to understand the change that the parents were expected to do in their treatment. And there were trauma-focused treatments for children who are traumatized. Individual treatment, you help the child to overcome bad experiences, bad memories, symptoms from thinking about things in the past that you are safe from now. And that's impossible to do if you do that and then say to the child, okay, now go back to the one who had hurt you, and you get reminded all over again. So if you do trauma-focused CBT, for instance, you need to have the child taken away from the traumatic reminders or the traumatic risk of re-traumatization, of course. And there were family methods, family therapy methods, bringing the family together, helping family communicate better, negotiate rules in the family, helping parents listen to the child and children listen to the parents, and getting along better. But they had a really hard time addressing the issues of violence because they were almost always not disclosed or hidden or going on behind the curtain, so to say. So they struggled with this. So CPC-CBT is a combination of all these three kinds of interventions. It's a manual-based model. You meet the families for 16 sessions. Each session takes at least one meeting, so it's at least 16 meetings with the family, or up to 24, depending on how long it takes. And it's 16 steps to go through. And each time you meet, the parents are with one therapist in one room, and the child is in with another therapist in another room. And at the end, they meet together and work together for the last part of the session. And the parents learn about the results of violence. They learn about alternative parental strategies, and they also learn about how to communicate with the child more effectively. And all of these meetings, every time they report what have happened the last week with all the kind of tendencies for any kind of violence in the family. The parents report in one form and the child report in his or her form. And the therapists cooperate and help the parents and the child to communicate more openly about everything that happens in the family and every tendency for violence reoccurring. And the child in its own treatment also learns about the effects of violence and is encouraged by the parents to be open about how things are in the family, and eventually are able to process the trauma and talk about the violence that he or she has been subject to. And at the end, when the child feels that the parents have changed their ways and are no longer abusive and have changed the way they raise them, and the parents are being accustomed to the thought that, okay, maybe we have been a bit too abusive, and prepared to listen to and take responsibility for what they have done to the child. In the end, they can meet and exchange and communicate about the actual violence that happened in a healing way for the child and the parents together. This is a very broad sketch of the intervention. And this intervention was brought to Sweden in around 2006, 2007 by social workers who were frustrated that they didn't have any instrument or any method to offer these families. And after a few years of trying to learn in a few places to do this and test it in Sweden and also to adjust the model to the Swedish context, because it was an American model and some of the interventions felt alien to the Swedish context. So after these adjustments, we were involved together with other authorities to do a pilot study and to see if this was possibly an effective method we could use in Sweden. Let's see. So this is the research I'm going to tell you about. First, I'm going to talk about the pilot study that was made and published in 2013. You see the reference here, and then I will talk about the recent studies that has been published in 2019, 2020. That is the results of a long, substantial study resulting in a PhD dissertation last year by Johanna Thulin. and these are two parts. One are the quantitative results of symptoms and so on, and the other one is interviews about what the children say about this treatment model. So firstly, the pilot study from 2013. It was done with 18 families, consisting of 26 adults and 25 children. And it was a simple measurement before and after treatment of those families who have been went through the first implementation of this method in Sweden. They fill out a lot of measurement reports. This was all done by pen and paper service before and after. And they used similar measurements or the same measurements that had been used in the American research done on this model to be able to prepare the results and see if this is applicable to the Swedish context. There was a bit of doubts about this because of the cultural differences, and the corporal punishment is allowed in the United States. It's not allowed here. And the change in attitudes in Sweden that we talked about this morning has been substantial and isn't the same in the United States, and the social context in the population seeking social services in the United States is different from the people coming to the social services in Sweden. So they use the same measurements to be able to compare. And it was comparable. The results were comparable with the American results, even though this was a small study and not you couldn't find significantly hardcore results on all the measurements. But in summary, in 2013, the parents had reported, interestingly enough, that they had decreased their own depression. And it's understandable. It's not a nice family life or a nice self-image or a nice view of yourself if you constantly fail as a parent and step over the line and hurt your child over and over again. It's understandable that could result in feeling bad and being depressed. And it was seen that after this 18 families had gone through the treatment, the depression symptoms of the parents had decreased significantly, actually. And the parents said that they used less violent strategies after the treatment, and they were more consistent in the way they were parenting their children. The children reported in their forms that they fill in that they had high levels of PTSD symptoms before the treatment, and also depression, and they were significantly reduced after the treatment. And the parents, they said that their parents used significantly less violence and had more positive parenting strategies. So this was a good result. It was a small study and not representative, of course, with this kind of numbers, and also with not so thorough foundation on the research. So, but it was enough for us to decide that this is worthwhile to try to implement this method in Sweden and make a more substantial research of the results. And that research has been done by Johanna Thulin at the Linnaeus University, together with professors doing the articles together with her and supervising her doing this, and resulting in her PhD thesis dissertation last year. And what she did was she had followed 80 subjects, children, starting in CPC-CBT on 11 different locations in Sweden, 11 different clinics. And she had a data collection from them prior to treatment and directly after treatment, approximately 4 months later. And 10 months after the first data collection, that was roughly half a year after the treatment has ended. And the main aim of the treatment model, of course, is to end violence and any kind of violence from the parents. And the children confirmed that they scored significantly reduction of parents' violence in a broader sense. That is violence in the form of shouting, threatening to break things, or all these kind of scolding and shouting and that kind of violent behavior from parents was significantly reduced, and there were no more physical hitting or slapping reported after the treatment at all. And she also measured this trauma symptoms with the trauma symptom checklist for children. It's a well-known and well-respected standardized symptom checklist for PTSD. And they, you see here the green ones are the measurement before treatment. The purple ones are just after ending the treatment, and the pink ones are at the follow-up 6 months later. And the first ones are the comparison group, or they are the normal level of PTSD on a non-clinical population. And the results were that on all the categories, these children who attended the CPC-CBT treatment were all on the clinical level on PTSD symptoms before treatments. So at a level comparable to children in a trauma treatment center. And after treatment, they were at the same level or lower as the norm group. So in a more common way of phrasing it is that they, according to the research survey, they had PTSD before the treatment and they were recovered after the treatment. One of the symptom categories, anxiety, they were not down to normal level precise after the ending of the treatment, but at the follow-up they were also down at the significantly down at the same level as the norm group. So PTSD, it was confirmed by this research that the trauma symptoms were reduced by the treatment. To remind us about this target group for this treatment model, we will have another film. It's the same music, but this is about research results on violence against children as a parenting style.
It's becoming more and more uncommon for parents in Sweden to use violence as a method of raising their children. Nowadays, 95% of parents consider any form of violence against children to be wrong. And an even higher percentage of children think that it's not okay for parents to hit them. Despite this, there are still children being abused. A common reason that parents resort to violence is that they are tired, stressed, or under a lot of pressure from things not related to the child. Parents who abuse alcohol or drugs or who have a mental illness are more likely to hit their children. It's hard to determine whether the violence is part of the parenting strategy or simply a way of releasing stress or frustration by directing it at a child. Researchers surveyed pupils in grade 9 and high school to find out just how common child abuse really is, meaning violence by an adult. Most often, it's a parent who is hurting the child. Physical violence. 14% had suffered physical abuse by their parents. Almost 11% had been subjected to serious forms of physical child abuse, and 5% had been subjected to physical child abuse on multiple occasions. Examples of physical child abuse include being pulled by the hair or the ear, or being hit. Serious forms of abuse include getting kicked, burned, or hit with an object, being threatened or injured with a knife or gun. Mental violence. 16% of the pupils reported that they had experienced mental abuse by an adult. 11% had experienced mental abuse by their parents. Examples of mental child abuse include frequent insults, frequently being treated like you don't exist, being locked in a room or being locked out of the home. Another example is being threatened with violence. This is not acceptable. Threats and blows may make the child obey in the moment, but it doesn't work in the long run. Children suffer badly from this, and it's harmful to the child physically, mentally, and socially. They become angry, sad, and scared, and they lose their trust in the parent who hurt them. It becomes a vicious cycle, and there is a great risk that the parent will become more and more violent and hurt the child even more. A child needs warmth and support from adults in order to grow and thrive. Help is available for any parent who uses threats, violence, and coercion as a method of raising their children. For example, there are parenting classes where parents can get help and learn how to raise their children without violence. Because all children have the right to grow up without violence. Everyone can help, whether you work with children or you are a neighbor, a friend, a relative. You can react and stand up for a child who is being abused. Inform. Tell children that no one is allowed to hurt them, and that they have the right to get support and protection if someone does. Ask. Direct questions make it easier for a child to talk about what is happening to them. Take action. If you suspect that a child is being abused, contact social services. If you discover abuse or think that a child is in danger, call the emergency services. If you want to report a crime, call the police or go to your local police station. Read and download the report Violence is no solution at almannabarnhuset.se.
Yes, thank you. There we go. I thought it was good to show this. This is the special follow-up from the research we talked about this morning about physical and violence, threats, and coercion and punishment from parents. So the objective results from the research by Johanna Thulin was that PTSD disappeared in these children, and the physical violence ended, and threats and other coercion, that kind of violence, significantly was lowered. And this was comparable with the American results, and in some cases even better regarding the stopping the violence, ending the violence. And the other part of her follow-up studies was about child interviews, about how this treatment worked for the children, what effects it had, and how they found the treatment, if they liked it, and so on. And I find that these are the unique and very interesting results. It hasn't been done in this way in the United States, and it's quite extensive. The way she did it was of the 80 families she studied, she asked the first 21 families if they would agree to be involved in this interview study and let their children be interviewed by her or not. And 20 of these 21 families agreed. And interestingly enough, the 21st one who said no, the parents argued or stated that they didn't want their child to participate because they didn't want the child to be reminded about how bad it was before the treatment. They were so happy with the treatment. So they didn't want the interviewer to talk and ask the child about feelings and things that have happened in the old days before the treatment, because this was a new time, and they didn't want to remind the child and make the child sad. But 20 families agreed. These were the first 20 of the first 21 families that was involved in the whole study project. And they were between 9 and 17 years old when interviewed. And these are just points pointing out the final conclusions of the analysis of all the interviews. And the first area that was reported about how life was changed by after the treatment, and so many of the children report that they were so relieved that they no longer feel that they need to live in fear of violence. The fear of violence, the constant stress of the risk of violence reoccurring had disappeared. And that was a very common kind of answer in the interviews. There was also a lot of answers pointing to that there's been a shift from how they interact with the parents, that they previously couldn't trust the parents, or they tried to avoid talking to the parents because they didn't want to upset them and risk them becoming angry. And now instead they could seek and receive support from their parents. That this was a theme from running through most of the interviews. And also the feeling of becoming more close and having a better relationship with the parents. And that it felt better to be at home. They didn't want to get out of the home as they used to, but it felt good to be at home again. And some of the interviewed children also stated that they believe that if they haven't got the CPC-CBT treatment, they hadn't been able to continue living at home. It would have become worse, and they would have been placed outside the home and seek protection from the parents. So this impact was profound in all the interviews. And so much so that Johanna Thulin told me that in the process of getting this article published, they got contacted by the peer reviewers, or the peer reviewers said that you can't publish that kind of results without publishing all the negatives. You must publish the negative results that the children reported. And the problem was that there were no negative results. All the interviewed children stated that life has changed so much to the better thanks to the treatment. So it's quite moving to read all this, and if you read the article, they're full of good quotations. So I will give you some at the end of this presentation too. So and it's quite rare, I think, to do an intervention and to have such in-depth and by an independent researcher, in-depth follow-up with the children themselves and ask them what actually happened and how do they see has the violence ended, have the parents changed, how has their life changed. Very interesting reading. Another part of the interviews were about how the treatment was perceived by the children. How did they think about going to the treatment? What do they think about it? What do they remember? What do they remember about the treatment, and so on? And as an psychologist, it's so interesting to read this because it's a rare treat to have independent reports on how children have experienced an intervention like this. A common theme was that they thought that this intervention was really child friendly, and it was you can read a lot of surprise in this kind of responses, that they were actually listened to and they were actually involved and informed. They knew what would happen and so on. And a lot of spontaneous comments about that this was really on their terms. This was when they went to these meetings, it was on their terms, not on the parents' terms. What they said was counted as much as what the adults said. So they felt involved, and they involved and informed about what would happen. They felt safe all the steps in this treatment. And they also lifted that it was the intervention was about the violence. It addressed the reason why they had come to this intervention. One part of Johanna Thulin's doctoral thesis was also about what these children had experienced before treatment, in the waiting time after the report to the police or the social services and waiting for treatment. In the interval in between, they had been underinformed, nervous, and had a hard time. Felt that they didn't know what would happen. They had lost control over the process. But when they come into this treatment, there was such a different. They felt that everything was about the violence and it was child friendly, and they were involved and informed. And many state with quite some surprise that this was actually the first time they ever had heard an adult talk to their parents that it's wrong to hit children, and this was a big thing for them to hear other adults talk to their parents in this way. So I recommend that you read this article if you haven't done it. It's as an old psychologist, it's very heartwarming to hear all these strong and coherent reports on how these children felt that they have been listened to, and it's not another adult who have come and told them what to do. It has apparently been on their terms. That's what the conclusion is, I think. I will give you some quotations from the article that I think is very, very pertinent. This is an 11-year-old girl who talks about the life after the treatment. This is what she says. Having this sense of security that the parent won't beat you anymore, or truly being able to know that she or he won't beat you anymore. That you can go to that person and speak calmly, and that they won't suddenly hit you because they don't think something isn't good. This is a typical response on how life has changed, and the sense of security, and the ending of living in fear of violence. This is another girl. She was 14 when she was interviewed, and she talks about this the last part of the treatment when she decided to trust that her parents had changed enough so she could share with them a letter about how the abuse had felt, and the parents wrote back a letter and read it to her about their responsibility and taking responsibility and excusing, pleading for taking responsibility for the violence that they had committed to her. And this is what you said about this. So earlier I thought it would be really hard, and I think I was more like affected by my dad's letter, because he was the one who was so incredibly closed off before. Since mom could be a little more emotional, and I really wanted to hear her letter as well, but I was very, very surprised by the letter from my dad, because he sort of described it as if he felt ashamed of what he had done, and he had never done that before. Rather, he has sort of always pushed the problem on the children, and that he always does the right thing. But now he explained, or now he wrote that what he had done was wrong. And this is a common theme that in the interviews with the children, the effect of this last portion of the treatment, when the parents actually have changed so much that they can take responsibility and stand up for what they have done, and not come with excuses anymore, and the children has felt safe to express how they felt about the abuse. And this last quotation is from a 13-year-old girl about life afterwards, and I brought it in because it's a bit of a comic relief also. She's telling about situations as examples of how life have been different after the interview. This is a follow-up interview, I think. She's described this situation. When my sister happened to drop her glass and I happened to drop my plate, he wasn't angry this time. He was just calm and said, "Yeah, it's okay. I can fix this. Accidents happened." So Mom said to me, "Dad is getting this. He's starting to be less stressed with this. Have you seen this?" Laughing. "Yes, I have seen it. Dad sat like this." And she shows how he was deep breathing. And then he went and said, "But it's all right." And then he was quiet at the table. So I sat there and had fun again. And when Dad went to take a shower, Mom and I talked for a while, and I said, "Did you notice that Dad wasn't angry? Instead, the thing with CPC-CBT helped. He was calmer." And I said, "Yes, it's much better now." This is quite a vivid description of how her dad has managed to change his problem with anger and stopped lashing out to the children and taking responsibility of calming himself down instead of hitting them. So those were a few of the quotations as examples of the interview study, and I think that's really the particular part of this research. Actually, it's quite unique to have such extensive reports from the children by an independent researcher, and it's heartwarming. And it's been hard for her to find any critiques from these 20 children who went through the treatment model. So I open the floor to reactions and questions, and I see Michael has shared that it's wonderful to hear the feedback from the children. I welcome any thoughts or reports. It's almost embarrassing to do this lecture since I'm also the manager of this CPC-CBT trainings. It could sound like I'm a sales merchant trying to sell this intervention, but you should hear when Johanna lectures about this. She's even more enthusiastic than I am because she met all these children and she's quite taken. Johanna has herself been social worker working with children and investigating these allegations in the past, and she was so taken about the results that this intervention gives in these families, who perhaps wouldn't have had any kind of intervention at all if they had got this. Michael, I think he's looking forward to training. Yeah, so I was selling it anyway.
You might not be a salesperson, but you really sold it. I'm really glad that I got this overview of how successful this is.
Good.
I didn't know any of that before, so thank you so much. Essie in the chat wants to know if it's possible to have a criminal investigation first and then start CPC-CBT. And then I'll raise one question that I've heard elsewhere is about training of trainers possibility.
First, the question from SC. Yes, in Sweden, the criminal investigation is one separate process, and it goes on by itself. And many of the families who go through the CPC-CBT have been prosecuted or are in the process of becoming prosecuted. And for some people, they finish the CPC-CBT treatment and then the prosecution comes afterwards because it takes a long time for the prosecutor to decide whether to prosecute or not. So it's also a process for parents to accept that however the police and prosecutor values the evidence and decides to go forward with the prosecution or not. It's the important thing for them is to take responsibility for the child and to tend to the child's needs of an excuse and of a rehabilitation and of a recognition of that it wasn't their fault and recognition of what actually happened. So there are all kinds of stuff. There are people in CPC-CBT who aren't prosecuted because they deny to the actual incidents that the child has reported, and there are parents who are prosecuted because they are over-trumped by the evidence, or there are parents who confess and also take the legal responsibility and take their punishment parallel with their treatment. So that's that question. And as the question to train the trainers, we have a system for our Swedish trainers that we, in cooperation with the founder, Melissa Runyon in the US, we arrange to train new trainers. A few of the trainers in Sweden has her confidence to help her to train the new trainers. So we can do that with Swedish trainers. I don't know if we can do that with people in other countries. When we do this in Sweden, we request that if you are to become a trainer for trainers, you need to do quite a lot of CPC-CBT yourself, and you need to be suitable as a teacher and go parallel together with the qualified trainers to do one course as an intern before you can apply to become a trainer for us. So that's how we do it in Sweden, and we haven't discussed if we would be able to do it in another country. I know that Finland is setting up an old schedule to implement the method with Melissa, and also doing a train-the-trainer program for making trainers in Finland. So that's good. Thank you, Aino. Wonderful to hear feedback from children and families. There should be more studies like the one with other models as well. Yeah, it's a shame that it isn't. One study with TF-CBT, yes, yeah. And one of the lectures I will be holding in the future is also on the difference between working with sexual abuse cases and these cases. And we will discuss quite a few differences between TF-CBT and this method in that lecture, I think. Yeah. Yes, and I think it's rare to have substantial follow-up with the children. We ask parents about their symptoms, and we ask teachers about their symptoms after treatment, and we often forget to ask them. And this is also, I think, this is also a good testament to the treatment that so many parents agreed to have their children interviewed. And the one who said no did it because of concern of the child's well-being, not concerned by hiding any bad results. So that was interesting too. I think it's mostly we who do research, or we who do treatment, that are oversensitive to asking children and asking parents for permission to ask children. I think they're happy to be asked, and we should do that more. I agree with you, Aino. So any other comments, or are we all hungry and eager for lunch? If there aren't any more comments, I think I have one last comment about results. I've now for several years followed quite a few therapists training in this method, and it's also a result to see them struggle because these are not easy processes. It's so obvious for the parents. It's not an easy process to acknowledge that you have hurt your child, and to feel safe that it's okay to talk openly about this, and to seek help how to change, and to learn new ways of raising your children, and also learn how to communicate in a more equal level with your child, and a more respectful level with your child. It's not an easy process for these parents, and many therapists in training, after half the training, they feel this will never work. These parents are hopeless. We can't shift them. This will never end. They are in despair. And then at the final training sessions, it's so amazing to see in their eyes the change. Oh, they are coming now. Oh, they have this wonderful. They changed the letters, and they're so happy together, and it's such a relief. And so it's also a great respect how hard this is to change your ways as a parent. And as you've heard how important this is for the children, but it's also important for the therapists. I think they do quite a journey. They are depressed after 6 or 8 sessions, and then they are celebrating at the end. It's all. I've managed quite a few trainings, TF-CBT and other trainings, as a manager, and it's quite rare to see this enthusiasm with the therapists at the end part of this intervention. It's almost religious, it's going to the kind of religious meeting at the end.
Are you starting a CPC-CBT cult?
yeah, I think we might do that. Yeah. So it's also important to have confidence in your method, and I think those who do this training end up being very confident in it. I think so. Good.
Okay. Any other questions for Bengt? No, I agree. I mean, I have seen the results from the studies plenty times, but I know also the extreme work that is put into evaluation like this, like you did, to include also the children and have controls. I know that there was an extremely big problems with getting a control group. So when doing these types of studies, I mean, it's easy afterwards to feel a bit, oh, they didn't do this or that, and be critical. But the enormous effort that is put into a study like this is fantastic. And I've also followed the process when you're publishing this and so on. So I mean, the results are stunning. I mean, when it comes to this with the trauma symptoms relief in that also stays. I mean, that's fantastic. Yeah. So I am as impressed as you are, Bengt, by this model.
Good.
So it's fantastic. And
it's interesting, this big control group. I can say something about that, because they, the researchers, Johanna and the team, they tried to get social services to ask all the families that didn't get CPC-CBT to be able to interview their children, and the social services didn't find anyone. So they were on and on to this. So they couldn't get a proper control group. So they chose instead to compare with the norm values of that age group. And as you would in a clinical setting, you would see if someone has symptoms, and if the symptoms are down to a normal level, well, the PTSD is gone. So
that's why we are reluctant to have studies like this for PhD students, because you never know if they will finish when you have like control group, because it can take so enormous amount of time. But Johanna did a great job. And for those of you who wants to listen more to this preparational sessions with Bengt, the next one is on Tuesday, the 4th of May, between 10 and 12. So same time as today. And Anastasia will send out the links to the coordinators who will forward it to the participants. I will also forward the PowerPoints to the coordinators, because we don't have the emails to all the participants today. But next time, you will talk about conjoint therapy, Bengt. Is that true? You haven't changed that? So experiences, benefits, and challenges. And then on the 15th of June, the third session is running, and it's child sexual abuse and child physical abuse in families, discussion on treatment and case management differences. And this session we will run together with the promised BaseCan course, that is the basic course in child abuse and neglect, that starts sorry, Shona sent something here. So it starts on the 17th of May, and we have already sent out the agenda for the course. So we really hope that we will have a lot of participants on this course, and Bengt will be one of the trainers in the course. So please have a look at the agenda that we sent out the other day related to the BaseCan course that starts on the 17th of May.
And we decided, didn't we, that you should also send the link to this recording of this, so that it's possible to view for those who couldn't attend today. Is that
Shona, do you want to you are in charge of the recording?
That's actually the message I just sent you. It was the link, so you can include that in your email.
Okay, good. Okay, great. So thank you everyone for today. Any other final questions or comments or whatever?
Yes, and if not, feel free to. Oh, thank you for the comments. Very nice. And feel free to contact me. You have the email in the PDFs slides you get. So feel free to contact me with any questions you might have afterwards.
Okay, so
Thanks.
see you on the 4th of May then, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Shona, are you still there?